Okay, let's dig into this. We've got a bunch of material here,
Mm-hmm.
mainly centered around this big one. The Defense Intelligence Agency's 2025 Worldwide Threat Assessment.
Right. The one presented to the House Armed Services Committee. That's kind of our foundation for today,
Mm.
based on info up to May 2025.
Yeah, but we're also bringing in some other key reports, especially those looking at Iran, right, and the
Yeah.
Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly. The tensions there and what it could mean for that vital waterway. It's pretty critical stuff we need to unpack from these sources.
So our mission really is to pull out the main takeaways, help you get up to speed quickly on what the DIA and these other reports see as the major threats facing the U.S. into 2025.
Yep. From Russia and China, the big state actors, all the way to things like terrorism and, issues closer to home. We want to understand the trends, the flashpoints.
Okay, let's dive in. The assessment kicks off painting a pretty stark picture, doesn't it? An increasingly complex national security environment.
It does. And it points to two big drivers. First, rapid technological change. And second, this growing cooperation between U.S. adversaries. That's a key theme.
And straight away, it brings the focus right here to threats to the U.S. homeland.
Absolutely. It's not just about overseas stuff anymore. The sources are clear. Competitors, even non-state groups, are trying to erode U.S. advantages and target U.S. citizens.
A big part of that is missiles, according to the report.
A huge part. They detail how adversaries are building up long-range capabilities. Ballistic, cruise, but also these newer, trickier systems like aeroballistic missiles, novel warheads.
And China and Russia are specifically mentioned as pushing hard on things like hypersonic.
Exactly. Aggressively pursuing them. Systems designed to challenge existing defenses. And then there's North Korea.
Right. The report says they now have an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile, that can reach the continental U.S.
That's the assessment. And beyond missiles, the homeland vulnerability also includes cyber networks, critical infrastructure, always prime targets.
Okay, sticking with the homeland, but shifting focus a bit. The southern border gets significant attention in this assessment. It's framed as a national security issue.
It is. The sources highlight how transnational criminal organizations, TCOs, and drug traffickers are exploiting migration flows. It's not just about movement. It's about evading law enforcement to conduct activities that harm Americans.
And they name names, don't they? Specific cartels driving the drug trade?
They do. Gulf cartels, CJNG, Northeast, Sinaloa controlling key corridors, but also other violent groups establishing a foothold inside the U.S. like MS-13 and Trinidad.
Which ties directly into the fentanyl crisis. The numbers mentioned are just awful. Over 86,000 deaths in 2024.
Terrible. And interestingly, the report notes a recent decrease in fentanyl seizures at the border FY25 first half and the year before.
How do they interpret that? Less fentanyl coming in?
Not necessarily. The assessment is cautious. It could be increased arrests, forcing changes, maybe cartels managing supply, or trying to avoid new security measures. It doesn't automatically mean less overall flow.
And other drugs, like cocaine and meth.
Expected to remain high, still very profitable for these groups.
But the border section takes a darker turn, too, concerning potential terrorist transit.
Yes, that's a key concern highlighted. The report cites a specific example from spring 2024. 8 individuals arrested with potential ISIS ties who apparently entered via the southern border. That's used to underscore the vulnerability.
Beyond the border, the report touches on other threats, too, like terrorism more broadly.
Right. Described as dynamic, diffuse, more decentralized plotting. ISIS is assessed as likely trying high-profile attacks in the West.
And specific groups posing the biggest threat.
According to the assessment, probably ISIS Khorasan in Afghanistan and the al-Qaeda group in Yemen. And they mentioned the ongoing threat of ISIS-inspired lone actors, citing that tragic New Orleans attack in January as an example.
There's also a mention of unmanned systems, UxS drones, basically.
Yeah, a growing threat, because they're just so accessible now. Cheap, easy to use.
Yeah.
That makes them ripe for weaponization or surveillance against, critical infrastructure, military bases, even the homeland itself. And attribution is often really difficult.
Okay, so that covers the immediate threat picture. Let's zoom out now to the major state actors, starting with China.
Right. The report says China is watching the U.S. very closely, preparing ways to deter or retaliate, and actively trying to split the U.S. from its allies.
We see that playing out with pressure campaigns against the Philippines, Taiwan.
Exactly. Multi-domain pressure. And they push narratives criticizing the U.S., trying to paint themselves as, a better alternative.
Their military buildup is described as rapid.
Extremely rapid, across all domains. The goal seems clear. capabilities to take Taiwan by force, project power in the Western Pacific, and critically disrupt any U.S. intervention. They've set targets for 2027 and 2035.
And they've reorganized their forces to focus on things like cyber and space.
Yes, the report highlights that realignment under the Central Military Commission. It underscores this focus on asymmetric advantages, space, cyber, electronic warfare, to potentially paralyze an opponent quickly. Their exercises are getting more sophisticated, too, like simulating Taiwan blockades.
The report also mentions concerning behavior in international waters and airspace.
It does. Unwilling or unable to operate safely sometimes. It cites that example of a Chinese J-10 dropping flares near an Australian helicopter. Very dangerous stuff.
And their space program is massive.
Second only to the U.S., over 1,000 satellites, about half for ISR intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, plus plans for huge mega-constellations by 2030 to compete with things like Starlink.
But they're also developing ways to attack other satellites. Counterspace.
Significant resources going into that. Disrupting, damaging, destroying adversary space assets. They have operational anti-satellite missiles for low Earth orbit, LEO, and are working on capabilities for geosynchronous orbit, GEO, plus electronic warfare jammers for satellite communications and GPS. They even mention specific satellites like Shijian-21 capable of disrupting others.
Regionally, the South China Sea is a major flashpoint.
Definitely. Contesting the Philippines at places like Second Thomas Shoal, using water cannons, lasers, dangerous maneuvers, causing collisions, injuries. The Philippines is pushing back with law and partnerships.
And China's global reach is expanding. Military bases, exercises.
Yeah, the exercise in Tanzania last year was their biggest ever in Africa. They're looking at potential facilities globally. Reem Naval Base in Cambodia is already hosting their ships. Pakistan, Cuba, Kenya, UAE, or other possibilities mentioned. Big ambition.
Latin America, too.
Yep, locking in trade, critical minerals. That deepwater port in Peru, interest in the Panama Canal. It's all part of the strategy.
And their relationship with Russia, especially in the Arctic.
Described as Russia's strongest Arctic partner. Joint patrols, developing the Northern Sea Route. Russia is apparently a bit wary but needs Beijing, so they make concessions.
What about China and Pakistan?
Very close ties. Pakistan relies on China economically, militarily. China is seen as a likely supplier for Pakistan's WMD programs, sometimes indirectly. There's some friction over attacks on Chinese workers in Pakistan, though.
Okay, let's shift now to Russia. The assessment frames the Ukraine war as existential for Putin.
Absolutely. Determined through 2025. Aims for Ukrainian neutrality, maybe partition. And despite huge losses, the report mentions staggering figures like 700,000 casualties, 10,000 vehicles. The battlefield is slowly tilting Russia's way.
Using North Korean soldiers, too.
Over 10,000, reportedly, along the Kursk salient. Their strategy is pure attrition. Target Ukraine's infrastructure, wear them down, outlast Western support. They seem okay with a slow grind.
But they want to avoid a direct fight with NATO.
That's the assessment. They know they can't win conventionally. But, and this is crucial, they are fully capable of asymmetric attacks, cyber, info ops, against the U.S. and allies. And they still have that strategic nuclear threat to the U.S. homeland.
How is their conventional military holding up after Ukraine?
Degraded significantly. Probably needs 3 years or more to recover. They're mostly refurbishing old gear rather than building new, except maybe submarines. Defense spending is way up, 40% of the federal budget, but sanctions and labor shortages are hitting them hard, hampering long-term plans.
Like China, Russia is also big on counterspace.
A major priority, seen as a deterrent. They're developing that nuclear-capable satellite the U.S. has known about.
Right, the assessment is more precise now.
Yes. And they vetoed that UN ban on WMDs in space. They have non-nuclear counterspace stuff too, lasers, ground-based ASATs, electronic warfare. They even tested a space-based weapon near a U.S. satellite in 2024.
And their nuclear forces overall.
Expanding. New systems, even nuclear air-to-air missiles. Stockpile estimates around 1,550 deployed strategic warheads, maybe 2,000 non-strategic. Plus, they're putting nuclear capabilities into Belarus missiles, aircraft, storage, training.
But they're unlikely to actually use them.
Very unlikely, unless the regime itself feels existentially threatened. They use the rhetoric, the exercises, as signaling, as deterrents against the West getting more involved. The report also mentions likely expanding chemical and biological programs, citing past nerve agent uses and current use of riot control agents in Ukraine.
The assessment also talks about a Russian destabilization campaign in Europe.
Yeah, since early 2024. linking pro-Russian actors to arson, sabotage, even assassination plots, trying to undermine Western unity on Ukraine using covert means, info-ops, cyber, proxies, avoiding direct escalation with NATO.
And their global influence efforts.
Belarus is key, a logistics hub and buffer. Ties with Armenia are fraying, but influence in Georgia is up. Central Asia remains important via energy and security ties. Africa's a big focus, low-cost competition, resources, arms sales, Wagner-type deployments. But that African presence likely needs Mediterranean access, like Syria.
And their ties with North Korea and Iran are crucial for the war effort.
Definitely. Getting drones and missiles from Iran, artillery and manpower from North Korea. And in return, Russia is sharing sensitive tech space, nuclear, missile tech with all three. China, Iran, North Korea. That's a major concern. Russia's even trying to meddle in Iran nuclear diplomacy, supporting Tehran's position against the U.S.
Which brings us neatly to Iran. The assessment says they're still focused on arming proxies.
Yes. Rearming Hezbollah, aiding Iraqi militias, Syrian militants, the Houthis, all aimed at pressuring Israel and threatening U.S. interests. The Houthis resumed attacks in March 2025, the report notes.
How did the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria affect Iran?
It hurt them. They pulled personnel out, disrupted their ability to resupply Hezbollah strategically, and it probably damaged their regional influence.
What about Hezbollah's own capabilities now?
Significantly degraded by Israeli strikes, according to the sources. Maybe 50% of infrastructure gone, key leaders killed. They probably won't disarm, but they pulled back forces from the border. Major conflict in Lebanon seems unlikely short-term, but violations could happen. Hamas, meanwhile, still has basic ambush and rocket capability.
And the Houthis?
They seem emboldened, gained support at home, still getting better missiles and drones from Iran. The assessment suggests killing senior Houthi leaders might just make them expand their targets.
The nuclear program remains a huge issue. What's the assessment there?
Senior leaders probably haven't decided to go full steam ahead on a weapon yet, but crucially, they've threatened to rethink their nuclear doctrine, if attacked that since April 2025. The sources also suggest they're likely pursuing certain chemical weapons and haven't stopped biological research.
And the IAEA finding them non-compliant.
That definitely raised tensions. Iran threatened a new enrichment site right after that vote. They publicly deny wanting nukes, but their actions speak volumes.
They're leveraging cooperation with Russia, China, North Korea.
Trying to ease isolation, sanctions. Using drone sales to Russia to try and get advanced gear like Su-35 jets. Expanding their space program with Russian help that SLV tech could aid an ICBM path.
But China's hesitant to sell them advanced weapons.
Seems so. Worried about sanctions, disrupting ties with other Gulf states? Russia, though, is sharing more tech-based nuclear missile.
Those other reports you mentioned really dig into the U.S.-Iran deterrence challenge.
You do. They highlight how inconsistencies in U.S. policy, like on the JCPOA, create openings for Iran. Iran exploits perceived U.S. reluctance to escalate using proxies effectively, and Iran is trying to deter the U.S. too.
It mentions Iran's center of gravity.
Yeah, the supreme leader, the IRGC, but also vulnerabilities like lack of support among the youth. There's this debate about carrot versus stick. The analysis suggests that these regimes often use an external enemy narrative to stay in power. So the sources argue for stronger regional partnerships, clearer signaling, and a credible U.S. military posture.
And this context makes the recent news reports about rising tensions even more alarming.
Exactly. Described as a precarious phase. Israeli officials openly talking about military action against Iran's nuclear program being unavoidable, preemptive strikes being discussed.
The Israeli military is on high alert, drills simulating long-range strikes.
That's what's reported. Finalizing plans, coordinating with the U.S. Netanyahu, saying the nuclear program must go, military option on the table.
And the U.S. moves pulling dependence from Bahrain, partial Baghdad embassy evacuation.
Seen in these reports as signs of deep pessimism about talks, possibly linked to an imminent Israeli strike threat, according to CBS. Iran, meanwhile, threatens U.S. bases if conflict starts.
And the critical point for everyone listening.
I see.
The Strait of Hormuz.
Yes. The Lloyd's List source quotes a BIMCO official saying conflict would most certainly effectively close the Strait of Hormuz, at least for some time.
Which is catastrophic for global oil supply. 1/5 of the world's oil goes through there. Closure means prices spike globally. Huge economic impact.
Absolutely massive.
Okay, let's quickly cover North Korea to round out the main adversaries. Nuclear-armed ICBM threat confirmed.
Yes, threatening the U.S. homeland, forces in the region, allies. Modernizing 2 smaller tactical nukes, lighter warheads. Their test site is ready for a 7th test. plus likely chemical and biological program.
And their special forces.
Highly trained, capable of infiltrating the South. They've even sent some to Russia for combat training, which is concerning for future tactics.
They're proliferating missile tech.
Illicitly procuring items with Chinese-Russian help and selling systems, notably missiles to Russia for Ukraine.
Their relationship with Russia seems much stronger now.
It is. That comprehensive strategic partnership, mutual defense clause. They get advanced systems like SA-22s from Russia for their Ukraine support. They still depend on China economically, but military cooperation there is minimal. Engaging Russia gives them leverage against Beijing.
China's role?
China blocks new UN sanctions, blames the U.S., despite their own concerns about NK's actions. And as we said, North Korea is getting key WMD-enabling tech from Russia's space, nuclear, missile.
Beyond the big 3 or 4, the assessment touches on other regions, Latin America, Africa.
Briefly, yes. Instability in Latin America creates openings for China-Russia, links to migration, crime. Haiti's gang problem is mentioned. Africa faces similar issues. Instability, humanitarian crises, governments turning to competitors out of frustration with the West. ISIS and al-Qaeda affiliates remain active threats there.
And foreign intelligence threats are also increasing.
More sophisticated, using advanced tech, non-traditional collectors like academics or tourists inside the U.S.
So, pulling this all together, why does this complex, kind of scary picture matter to someone listening right now?
Because it's not abstract, is it? It hits home. Potential disruptions to energy, economy, think Hormuz, direct security risks here, border issues, cyber attacks, the missile threat. It affects global stability, trade, everything.
This assessment is really a window into the challenges the U.S. is grappling with. Adversary cooperation, tech advancements, regional instability, it all feeds itself.
Exactly. It shows how struggles in faraway places, or advances in space tech, are seen by the DIA as directly impacting U.S. security and prosperity.
And the Iran situation really crystallizes that delicate balance, doesn't it? Confronting adversaries who have advanced capabilities but want to avoid direct conventional war.
Right. Diplomatic dead ends met with military posturing, with potentially massive global consequences, like closing Hormuz hanging in the balance.
The sources don't really offer easy answers, do they? Just highlight the sheer complexity. It leaves you thinking, how does the U.S. effectively deter these interconnected threats, especially when adversaries cooperate, exploit instability, develop asymmetric tools, yet try to avoid direct confrontation? What does the assessment itself suggest about the path forward?